communities right here. Listen everywhere on your number one family station, Isaac 98.1 FM.
Good evening and welcome again to another edition of the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings, and our objective is always to have an engaging, interactive and civil discourse, and in so doing help develop a culture of peace and understanding through constructive dialogue and, yes, citizens' participation. Our guests are persons who express views and opinions, perspectives of their own, and sometimes may not necessarily be that of the FBN network, the Citizens Community Forum, or that of the host. And our topics are also wide-ranging. Discussions at times may be emotionally charged, but surely we can always find common ground and learn from each other, irrespective of differing views. Now, chaos, disruption, disgrace, unparliamentary behavior, disrespect, assault on democratic principles, death to democracy, and an attack on our Constitution are all words and descriptive expressions that found their way into the national conversation over the last several days as the official opposition, the United National Congress, brought a motion to the Parliament seeking removal of a sitting president. This evening, we are going to have another look at what transpired at the Parliament on Thursday last, and with that, seek an interpretation of the Trinidad and Tobago Constitution as it relates to the removal or non-removal of a sitting head of state. And this follows on from a motion, as I said, on Thursday brought by the opposition, United National Congress, to have Her Excellency removed from office by first seeking to have a motion passed, debated, the setting up of a tribunal, and then possible impeachment. Now, to help us unravel some of these matters, joining me is Mr. Martin George, attorney at law, former member of a previous constituted police service commission, and one who is well versed with the law and constitutional matters. Mr. George, good evening to you and welcome.
Yeah, hi, good evening to you, Stephen, and good evening to your listeners and Isaac 98.1 FM. Welcome
again, Mr. George. We always happy to have you. Mr. George, I want to start out the discussion this evening by, treating with this very burning issue. Some people might say, it's the elephant that remains in the room. What really are the stated constitutional grounds for removal of a sitting president? Help us understand the process, and by extension, what does not constitute or have any foundation in law?
Well, all right, the thing is, Stephen, firstly, I will just want to touch upon the question of whether they had the votes or not, because that's the first thing we really need to look at. When you look at what is required in the circumstances, it was clear from the outset that the opposition did not ever have the required votes to even move this forward. And that's where I have always had a difficulty with them bringing this motion. I have said before, and I have said repeatedly, that if it is you are going to embark on a motion such as this, then you must treat it seriously. You must approach it from a very, diligent, dedicated perspective, because it's a serious thing. This is not something you bring lightly. This is not something you embark upon as a frolic or a game, or you use it for, grandstanding or political one-upmanship. This is something where you are calling for the head of state, the highest office in the land, to be removed. So in those circumstances, you clearly ought to ensure that you have dotted all your I's, you've crossed all your T's before you embark upon it. So therefore, the nation can treat your motion with seriousness and treat you with seriousness because they will say, well, look, yes, you have properly prepared, you have properly, researched this, you have properly brought this, and therefore, in those circumstances, people will be willing to give you an air. But if it is that you don't do that, and then you come and then you make a mockery of the parliament, I have tremendous difficulty with that, and I've said so from the get-go. The fact of the matter is that when one looks at the law, you look at section 36 of the Constitution,
Yes.
right? It says, the president shall be removed from office where, A, a motion that his removal from office should be investigated by a tribunal is proposed in the House of Representatives. B, the motion states with full particulars the grounds on which his removal from office is proposed and is signed by not less than 1/3 of the membership of the House of Representatives.
Yes.
C, the motion is adopted by the vote of not less than 2/3 of the total membership of the Senate and the House of Representatives assembled together. D, a tribunal consisting of the Chief Justice and 4 other judges appointed by him, being as far as practicable the most senior judges, investigate the complaint and report on the facts to the House of Representatives. E, the Senate and the House of Representatives assemble together on the summons of the Speaker, consider the report, and by resolution supported by the votes of not less than 2/3 of the total membership of the Senate and the House of Representatives assembled together, declare that he shall be removed from office. So it is a very serious, detailed, and involved procedure,
Yes.
which you are invoking powers of the parliament, you are invoking powers of the Constitution, you are seeking to invoke the Chief Justice's assistance and 4 other judges. So therefore, this is not something you embark upon frivolously.
Yes.
So if you knew from the get-go that you did not have the votes to make it past the hurdle where it says at C, the motion is adopted by the vote of not less than 2/3 of the total membership of the Senate and the House of Representatives assembled together. So in other words, you know you did not have those votes. So then what was the purpose of the entire motion?
Okay, I've heard that, yes.
I will say further, Stephen, it's not to say that in the appropriate case, one cannot or should not bring a motion
or challenge,
simply because you don't have the votes. If you have sufficient, cogent, compelling, and consistent evidence to show that, look, there is clearly a case of wrongdoing, then it may be worth making the point, even though you don't have the votes. And I'll give you as an example. If you recall, in terms of the impeachment proceedings in the US, which occurred recently with former President Donald Trump,
yes,
the Democrats knew they did not have the votes for the removal of office. So in other words, the articles of impeachment were drafted, prepared, and passed. That's the first hurdle. The next step was the removal from office. So similarly here, you have the question of the removal from office. They knew they did not have the votes, but they had a mountain of evidence that needed to be articulated publicly.
Okay.
So in other words, they felt that, look, even if it's just to make the point, we must express this publicly by way of this motion for the removal of the president. So therefore they did that. In this case, respectfully, it appears that the opposition had neither. They did not have the votes and they did not have the evidence. As we all know, Stephen, and there are several attorneys, within the ranks of the
there are
opposition.
several interpretations, yes, of what would have...
They are fully aware that when it comes to, proving something in a court, and of course, Parliament is the highest court, within the borders of Trinidad and Tobago, right? When it comes to proving something, you must have the ability not just to, make a statement, but you must have the evidence to back it up.
Back it up.
You cannot go on speculation, supposition, well, maybe, or I think. No, that's not how it works. And they know that. So that's why I've always said, listen, if it is that there really is some evidence you have, then of course, by all means, Yes, you may have a right, even if you don't have the votes, to articulate that point. But if you don't have the evidence and you don't have the votes, then why are you making a theater and a spectacle of our national parliament in this way?
All right, I'm sure that there are lots of people who agree with you, Mr. George, and on the other side, there are people who may have some differing views. But let's just get a listen to the honourable opposition leader now, Mr. George, as she spoke in the Parliament as she brought that motion, and I would have you respond thereafter. Let's just get a listen to what the opposition leader said.
Member for Superior, would you kindly propose your motion in the text of your motion?
Well, if you put my mic on, I will continue so to do. Is this mic now on? Thank you very much, madam. I'm saying these guidelines done by your good self forgets the word parliament, comes from the word parley, to allow for debate. And before I read the motion, I want to say these guidelines are illegal, null and void. Illegal. We participate in these proceedings, the opposition participates in these proceedings under protest. I want to make that very clear. The Section 36 motion, madam, reading the procedure that you have provided to us, again unilaterally, I will turn to it now. And I read that motion. Whereas Section 35 of the Constitution provides that the President may be removed under Section 36 from office where she, A, willfully violates any provision of the Constitution, and or B, behaves in such a way as to bring her office into hatred, ridicule, or contempt, and or C, behaves in a way that endangers the security of the state. And whereas there have been unrefuted reports, A, of recent events at President's House, of interference in the selection processes undertaken by the Police Service Commission. And B, that a list of nominees for the Commissioner of Police prepared by the Police Service Commission was recently submitted to the President, and the President refused to notify the House of these nominees. And whereas the President has neglected to publicly address those reports and has otherwise failed to faithfully execute her several duties under the Constitution. And whereas, in the circumstances, the President should be removed from office since she A, willfully violated the provisions of the Constitution securing the independence of the Police Service Commission in the performance of its functions, and also willfully violated Section 123 of the Constitution. B, behaved in such a way as to bring her office into hatred, ridicule, or contempt, and/or facilitating interference with the Police Service Commission, and also by proceeding in the circumstances to appoint new members of this Police Service Commission. C, behaved in a way that has resulted in the endangerment of the security of the state through her inactions and failure and or neglect to act. And D has otherwise failed and or neglected to execute her duties under the Constitution. Be it now resolved that pursuant to Section 36 of the Constitution, a tribunal be established to investigate the removal of Her Excellency Paula May Weeks, ORTT, from the office of the President.
Mr. George, the opposition leader there, Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, as she, brought that motion to the Parliament. And we were talking about evidence, Mr. George. I'm not sure if that was clearly, articulated in terms of what evidence do you have that would support the removal of a sitting president? Can you help us, based on what you would have heard by the opposition leader?
Well, it's a question that you actually should put to all the opposition members who were in support of this, because, I mean, just basic common sense would tell you that based upon what was read there, there's absolutely no evidence of any wrongdoing. And that's my point. You see,
speculations?
There's that's the point. There's rampant and rife speculation. Nobody's doubting or disputing that. And I have also actually been on record as saying I am unhappy with the responses and explanations proffered by the president. I thought she ought to be clearer, more explicit, and more direct in her response to refute all the suspicions and doubts that were out there in people's minds.
Yes.
I have said so publicly that I am not happy with the way she has responded. However, that does not elevate it to the level where you can now say, well, since she didn't explain it properly, I now have evidence.
Okay.
Come on. Well, how do you make that leap of logic? It's basic common sense. And that's why I will chastise the opposition, relentlessly for this, because they have several attorneys among their ranks. Some of them carrying the title of SC, Senior Counsel. That's the title some of them carry. So you know better. You know that you don't have the evidence. You know that you can't make that quantum leap from, well, I suspect this to be the case, to saying I have evidence of this, when you don't actually have any evidence. Nothing has been presented beyond the speculation. And that's what the motion itself says.
All right. So based on that, there was no legal foundation to even, bother to carry this through.
Even before you go to the legal foundation, there's no evidential foundation. That's the point I'm making.
Okay.
And that's where I have a difficulty with, them going this route. There's absolutely no evidential foundation at all upon which they could have even, begun to mount a case.
Yeah.
So therefore, it appears that you are just engaging in gamesmanship and, political theater for your supporters to say, well, we tried and they blocked us.
Yes.
Come on. How stupid do you expect people to be?
All right, and you're listening to and viewing the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. I have with me Mr. Martin George, attorney at law. Our topic this evening, removal of president. What does the Constitution say, Trinidad and Tobago? Mr. George, the tempers that flared among opposition, members, and I suppose, they were pointing fingers at the other side, and, especially the House Speaker, Bridget Anisette George. Would this now, you believe, damage the relationship between the opposition leader and the Speaker, or should it not? But the question remains, Mr. George, how are they expected to relate and do the business of the people in the face of what could be tension continuing among these two high office holders of the land?
Well, Stephen, I don't think there's really any serious change in the way they relate. If you notice, that has been the nature of our politics for years. Unfortunately, it's always this very adversarial nature whereby it is, damaging and denigrating to the other side. And listen, both sides engage in that type of behavior.
Of course, because I've seen.
I point the finger at both sides.
Right, because I've seen where even one of the members of the opposition stood up, even while the Speaker was on her legs, and there was this bantering back and forth, and there was even a comment, I think, that was made by one of the other members saying that that the public did not vote for you to have come, with these what they call these guidelines, with which the opposition believes had no foundation as well.
Well, the thing is, okay, Stephen, you see, I think we, the people, have to take stock of ourselves and think of what we want for our future. In other words, are we going to continue to condone this type of behavior on both sides? It just so happens that
the shoe was on one foot.
Opposition veiled shame and infamy.
Yes.
The point is, we have seen the government behave, badly also. And I mean, even the reactions, I saw something where the Prime Minister was taking pot shots at them, and saying, well, the motion was badly drafted and whoever did it didn't know what they were doing. And come on, you are Prime Minister. You don't need to go down into the gutter there with them, So therefore, the blame is shared on both sides. Maybe not equal, but at the end of the day, the fact is our parliamentarians have not been exemplars to the nation. The little school children should be ashamed knowing that these are the persons who are there to make our laws and shape our laws and, shape our destiny.
Yes.
I would be ashamed if I were a school child. I would not want to own them as my parliamentarians at all.
But one had to have been somewhere else, Mr. George, not to have noticed the pain, of what even the House Speaker, was interrupted. I checked it. It was more than over 50 times. Interruption after interruption, and having to stop in mid-flight. I'm sure that would have been a painful exercise, for some people just looking on. But certainly, the Trinidad and Tobago Constitution, we have a written constitution, Mr. George, as you know, which was enacted way back in 1976. And checking, I realized that our supreme law, as it is often guardedly referred to, the one on the issue of constitutional interpretation, which always seems to run into conflict depending on who is reading it and which side one may be on, a side of the political divide. Is this now another case for constitutional reform, a revamp of this very sacred document of Trinidad and Tobago? We often hear that the Constitution is clear, Mr. George, but is it really?
Well, I mean, there's always room for change and growth and improvement, because that's what law is. Law is a living, breathing thing, and we as human beings and we as societies, we develop, we change, we grow over time, and you recognize that, okay, maybe this law needs to be changed because it's outdated. So, of course, there's always need for constitutional reform. We have a law review commission that is supposed to be actively engaged in that sort of exercise on an ongoing basis. But, of course, if you're talking sweeping seeking constitutional reform, then what is necessary is that you must set up a constitutional commission to specifically look at that and, start the reform process. If you notice, Stephen, over the years, you've had successive governments lamenting and complaining about constitutional reform. What have you seen any of them do? Therefore, what I'm saying is that they all pay lip service to it, and they all raise the issue of constitutional reform when it's convenient to them, if you follow me, right? Yes. So it's convenient to them, so therefore they say, oh, we should have but they've never done anything serious about it, and that's why we really need to consider who we have as our representatives and the way they behave. And we, the people, we need to stop supporting this type of bad behavior, the rogue behavior we saw last week, and the rogue responses by the government, which we saw, in retaliation to it. Yes. It's always a tit for tat. It's always a finger pointing. It's always, well, you did that too, because such and such happened in your time. So don't complain about what and that's how it goes. A constant back and forth, and therefore there's no progress being made. If you notice, Stephen, as a nation, when you look back over the last 10, 15 years, by and large, we have not progressed much. We have basically just been marking time, running out the oil money, running out the gas money, squandering it, frittering it away, and, a constant procession of, jesters, clowns, and, invalids crossing the political stage, and just, making old mass, as we say in the local parlance, of the, constitution and the parliamentary democracy that we're supposed to be having.
All right. Well, I did hear one commentator talking about, a Juve type of, behavior in Parliament, but that's, that's another, that's another descriptive.
But it's not off the mark at all.
That's another descriptors, as I did my opening, there were so many descriptives and interpretations of people, saw how that process, transpired on Thursday last. Well,
I'll tell you what it really amounted to. It descended into a level of hooliganism in our parliament, whereby if you look at the law, you look at the constitution, it's clear you not only didn't have the evidence, you also didn't have the votes. Even the procedure, there's nothing in the procedure that speaks about a debate. You heard when I read out all the sections in terms of what is required. There's nothing there about a debate, so therefore the speaker was quite correct. She was quite correct when she said there shall be no debate on it because the Constitution doesn't provide for it.
But I think what was also said on the part of the opposition as well, as we seek to to balance the discussion,
of course.
Mr. George, in essence, the opposition was saying a motion comes with a debate, and surely in this instant, as you rightly said, does not arise. It's something that can. Is it something that can be or should be challenged?
Okay, all right, let's look at it again, all right? The president shall be removed from office where a motion that his removal from office should be investigated by a tribunal is proposed in the House of Representatives. B, the motion states with full particulars the grounds on which his removal from office is proposed and is signed by not less than 1/3 of the total membership of the House of Representatives. C, the motion is adopted by the vote of not less than 2/3 of the total membership of the Senate and the House of Representatives assembled together. There's no room there for any creative interpretation to say, well, the motion shall be debated.
Constitution is clear.
And one would think that the framers of the Constitution, in their wisdom, would have probably put that there because, in other words, your motion is supposed to be so clear, so power-packed with the evidence that there's no need for a debate. You basically present your motion and you have the vote on it, and once the vote is there, then you move it forward. So therefore, the debate doesn't add anything to the motion. So, and the Constitution doesn't provide for a debate. So therefore, I don't know where that idea came from, you know. And I mean, I've heard people arguing that it's a denial of their constitutional rights to not have a debate.
Yes.
My God, the very Constitution clearly makes it, you know, obvious that you don't have any option for debate.
All right, so there we are. And we like to remind our listeners and our viewers that this is the Citizens Community Forum. Our topic this evening, removal of a president. What does the Constitution say? Trinidad and Tobago. And I have with me Mr. Martin George, attorney at law. Mr. George, as we continue our discussion on this very important subject matter, moving just, slightly to the Police Service Commission, the then Police Service Commission, because this thing all, unraveled and it started there with whatever would have transpired, among certain key players. And I had a listen to a former chair of the commission, who you would know very well, Professor Ramesh Desaran, and he had some concerns, and he made some comments very, very early when we begun to hear about what would have been transpiring with the Police Service Commission and the appointments and the acting police commissioner at that time. And this is what Professor Desaran said. This was very, very early. Let's just get a listen, and we will continue the discussion.
A lot of things here and there that are not quite in the correct alignment. And that is why I say, when I say Dr. Rowley should intervene now properly as Prime Minister and leader of the government, I think that it should be taken to Parliament. Whatever he intends to do should be taken to Parliament. So it will be transparency, and it will be involve a lot of other people, not only himself as a dictator. But we need to clean the stables. Tense is too much now. High level of inefficiency and irresponsibility by the people who should know better. And I am sorry for the public. I mean, we're talking about economic recovery. We need a recovery in these particular matters of governance. We need a constitutional recovery because the Constitution has been shamelessly attacked and left so. You have to heal. And that falls on the shoulders of the Prime Minister primarily. And the system we have, it gives the public, the citizens, a responsibility to protest. And the nature of the protest is all subject to examination, of course. But the contract that we have between the citizens and the elected members of Parliament is such that it gives the public a right. That is why we have to be careful, and I mentioned the rule of the Attorney General, in diminishing the rights of the public, because they have to be fully equipped with sufficient rights and privileges to change a government properly or even before an election. Couldn't have the public punished as it is, to this extent as we know witnessing, and expect them to remain quiet and docile, and then have somebody up speaking about the difference in interface and interference, and just saying things are worse than it was before in 2006. That cannot work.
Mr. George, your good old, former colleague, Professor Ramesh Desaran, and I know, very outspoken, but at the same time very guarded in his comments there, Mr. George.
Yeah, well, I mean, the point is, I guess he's basically making the call for constitutional reform there,
Yes.
But, it's not just that in the scenario which unraveled. It's not just constitutional reform. It's office holders either not understanding their roles or responsibilities or being careless or reckless in regard to those. And that is what I think sparked this entire debacle that the nation has witnessed unraveling in slow motion, real time, before our very eyes, as if we're in some sort of twilight zone from which we'll never wake up. You look at basic, simple things, Stephen. When you had a scenario, say for instance, okay, let's just use as an example. If it is that the Prime Minister did send a letter to the Police Service Commission saying that he had lost confidence in the Commissioner of Police, and he sent it with nothing more than saying, well, in my judgment. So that's all we have so far from him on the political platform. Yes. He said he did so because that was in his judgment. Now, my position would be, okay, yes, of course, one always has the greatest of deference and respect for the judgment of a prime minister, and in fact, someone who is even the head of the National Security Council. So of course, I have the fullest of respect for your judgment. However, if you expect me to act just on what you consider to be your judgment, evidence is presented, and I can then now do my own independent inquiries and make my own independent checks to verify the information and evidence that you've given me, and then form my own independent judgment. Unless and until that happens, all I can say is noted. Okay. But I cannot take that on board, if you understand me. Right? So the same way, when you heard about, a minister making a request of the former commissioner, Mr. Griffith, that he should go on leave. Yes. And then subsequently, you saw the Police Service Commission request that that the former commissioner go on leave. And the minister did admit that, look, there was some communication from the cabinet to the Police Service Commission. Then these things raise questions, because to the man in the street, it would appear that, wait, is it that you guys are under the direction and control of the political directorate? Yes. And those are valid questions. And that's why I said the Police Service Commission then, under former Chairman Bliss Sipasad, they had a right and a duty to come out and make the situation clear. Because it could very well be that in their own independent judgment and based upon their own independent investigations, they had their own reasons for deciding to send him on leave. But if you don't make that clear, you don't present that evidence to the public, and you have this sequence of events, then the obvious implication
or the inference, there's an inference,
acted on the directions of the political directorate, and that's where the problems began.
That's where the confusion. Okay, all right, I hear you, Mr. George. Well, we just like to remind our listeners that this is the Citizens Community Forum. You're listening to and viewing the Citizens Community Forum. I have with me Mr. Martin George, attorney at law, and our topic this evening: removal of a president. What does the Constitution say? Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. George, we have to take a short break, and we will be back in a bit. When we come back, we will continue the discussion. Hello, I'm Stephen Cummings. Join us every Wednesday for the Citizens Community Forum. Where are we now? Your assessment?
We're in a very dark place. As Mr. Vivian Icol wrote in a title of his book, we are in an area of darkness.
The structure of the economy between 2009 and 2019, Stephen, landed this economy in the 25 worst performing economies in the world. Even my honest answer is, except for the poorest and most vulnerable, we have to cut. It's not as if we have a choice.
And that's why I'm saying, Stephen, we really need some clear guidance and direction from the government in terms of what's the long-term plan. We know we're in a dark place, but we need you to be able to show us the light and show us, well, okay, we're headed in that direction. We don't want to end up like the Israelites wandering for 40 years in the desert and making no progress whatsoever.
And we are streaming live on YouTube, FBN TV, Facebook, and Isaac 98.1 FM every Wednesday, 8 to 9 p.m. And welcome back to the Citizens Community Forum. Our topic this evening, removal of a president. What does the Constitution say, Trinidad and Tobago? And I have with me Mr. Martin George, attorney at law. Mr. George, welcome back.
Hi, evening, Stephen, and thank you.
We wanted to continue in that same vein, Mr. George, and when we went to the break. Now, this business of political, interference and inferences that are made, in reference to the involvement of the president in carrying out her duties, because the president is part of the parliament. You have the president, you have the upper and the lower house. Is it a case of the president unfairly being brought into the body politics?
Well, the thing is, I wouldn't say being unfairly brought into the body politic. What I would say is being unfairly treated once brought there. So in other words, there's no doubt that in a way, the president's office has to give some explanation and accountability. And that's where I faulted the president's office for the statement that came out. It was a long, very extensive, full-page ad in all the newspapers. But the point is, it did not zero in on some of the most critical questions that the public had. And in fact, I think on one of the main issues, the president made it clear that she's not addressing that, because she didn't think it relevant to the explanation that she was given. And I think that the public respectfully differed with her on that point. In other words, that was actually one of the issues that the public wanted her to address. And as I say, highest office in the land, but it would have appeared to me that even if you wanted to steer clear of naming and shaming individuals, then all the president had to do was make a very clear, at no time in my presence did any act of political interference in the Police Service Commission occur. My office will never tolerate any act of... So these are simple, clear statements that could have put the issue to rest in a way. There will always be those who will say, no, we need to hear names, etc. But
well, there would always be that that crash.
The mainstream individual who is rational, sane, thinking, that may be more than sufficient, because at the end of the day, we are entitled to take the word of the president. But I felt that by not addressing these issues frontally, that's where I felt that his statement fell short. And that opened the wedge for the continued beating of this drum to say, well, look, that means there's something to hide, and that's where the opposition, took it to the point of the ridiculous and created the theater of the absurd in our national parliament.
All right, theater of the absurd. Do we have, I ask this question all the time, Mr. George, and I'm gonna put it to you again. Do we have a constitutional crisis in Trinidad and Tobago regarding what, as an example, what transpired over the past few, days? We look at Thursday last, involving the Police Service Commission, the Prime Minister as head of the executive arm of government, and the office of, of the head of state. Is there a constitutional crisis in Trinidad and Tobago? Some people think that there is no, there's no such. What is your view on that?
I think we have a crisis of leadership, a crisis of governance, a crisis of, national, guidance and policy and, directives. Those are the crises we have in Trinidad and Tobago. The Constitution does need reforming, but that's not critical.
It's not a crisis in itself.
That's not a crisis in itself. The crisis that we face is the persons we have in leadership on both sides. That's the crisis we face in Trinidad and Tobago. And the sooner we recognize that and call them to heal, the better we will be, for it. Because we have to understand, and I'll tell you why we are so mired in this scenario, Stephen. It's a deep quagmire that we're in, because you have the hardcore opposition supporters who would applaud and defend the atrocious behavior we saw in the parliament. You will have those who will applaud that. And that's their base. That's their hardcore supporters. On the other side, you have those who would applaud, when you have persons from the government behaving badly. If you recall that, ugly incident with this person, Inshan Ishmael, and
yes,
the
there was that social media posting. Yes.
But yet still, the hardcore supporters of the government would applaud that type of behavior. And that is the root of our problem in Trinidad and Tobago. Because, in other words, no one is there to call these people to account to say, hey, listen, cut the nonsense out on both sides. No, because they know that they have the support of their base. It's like Trump. If you look at it, the reason why he could continue with his reckless, selfish, inane behavior is because his base supports everything he does. And it's the same type of parallel we have here in Trinidad and Tobago, where each side, they know that it doesn't matter what they do, their base will support them regardless.
But when it comes to the parliament, Mr. George, and parliamentary behavior, now one can do what one, I suppose, would like, outside of the parliament. But when it comes to parliamentary behavior, what do you think can be done apart from, I looked at the speaker. The speaker was, as I said, being interrupted so many times, not being able to complete, her reading, and on so many occasions, and having great difficulty in controlling, members of parliament. I don't know how you saw that, but certainly, if we don't have the kind of behavior within, our parliament, is it that one expects a different mode of conduct to be outside of the parliament?
Well, exactly.
Because you're in the full public glare. Yeah.
That's right. And you are in the highest decision-making body in the land. That's the point. So if you show no respect there, then of course it's going to be all mass and chaos when you are outside. And the point is that there are the standing orders of the parliament, and you have recourse also to May's parliamentary practice, which is like the Bible guiding parliamentary behavior, not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but the world over. And the speaker does have powers in the normal course of things to invoke the standing orders and to, bring persons to heel and bring them to book. She has the power to suspend members from a sit-in. She has,
I saw great restraint there, Mr. George, on behalf of the speaker.
I saw it also, and quite frankly, I'm not sure why in those circumstances, because I think that these are situations that certainly warranted, some stern, decisive action to bring some control to the proceedings. It's not sufficient to say, well, let them have their say, because that wasn't having a say. That was rowdy, thug-like behavior in our national parliament.
Because under a normal parliamentary sitting, Mr. George, you can be asked to leave. Take
That's
5 minutes,
correct.
take a walk. Even
correct.
the simple disruption by a phone can have you outside of the parliament.
Yes, that's correct.
and this what happened occurred on Thursday. Would have gone beyond.
Beyond the pale, for sure.
Certainly,
Yes.
Well, we also like to remind our listeners that this is the Citizens Community Forum. Stephen Cummings, our topic this evening, looking at the removal of a president. What does the Constitution say, Trinidad and Tobago? And I have with me Mr. Martin George, attorney at law, helping us to unravel some of the intricacies and some of those areas within the Constitution that some of us may not, fully understand. We probably need to get some clarity on that in respect of what would have transpired on Thursday. Mr. George, we've been here before. One remembers the troubles of that engulfed the then constituted Integrity Commission, to name another of our bodies, independent bodies here. And I think it was in 2015, was it?
I can't remember the year, but
yes,
it was in relation to the matter which where they were investigating, Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley in relation to certain allegations.
Made,
and
yes.
as a result, he filed an application to the High Court for judicial review. And based upon that application, the High Court ruled in his favor and said that the Integrity Commission, in the way they proceeded, that they were wrong because they breached his rights to natural justice and procedural fairness. And therefore, as a result of that, the entire Integrity Commission imploded.
Yes, I think the board was also disbanded, or members resigned, was it?
Well, yeah, the entire board collapsed. The entire board collapsed.
I know you were very, yes.
That was under, I think, former Justice, it may have been Monica Barnes. I can't recall exactly, but the entire board imploded.
Yes, but as I said, we've been here before, Mr. George, with these issues that seem to plague, our institutions. What can we do to improve, on the operations of these independent bodies that are supposed to be part of, maintaining good governance and ensuring that there's transparency and all of that? Because, as I said, there was the Integrity Commission, and now there's the Police Service Commission. There might be another body which may be brought, into focus whenever. How can we, or what can we do to improve on the operational side of these very important critical institutions in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, the thing is, the first thing I would suggest, Stephen, is that instead of these bodies being staffed by part-time commissioners, they really need to be full-time commissioners. And I'll tell you why. Not only the workload is, overbearing in terms of the amount of stuff you need to do, and it's difficult to do it on a part-time basis, but also you will find that the institutional knowledge you need to gain can really only be gained if you really devote the time and effort to learn and study and ensure that you get the grip of what is really required of you. They would also need to have, for all of them, permanent secretariats staffed by highly trained, highly competent persons of fairly high status, and maybe led by someone of the level like a permanent secretary. And I'll tell you why. Because the permanent secretaries in all the ministries, they are basically the repositories, by and large, of the procedure and the propriety of things in terms of how things are done. When you have new ministers appointed to any government department, it's the permanent secretary and the deputy permanent secretary who would have to basically hold their hands and walk them through to show them, hey, this is how we do. No, we don't do that. Stop, you can't send that out. Because they know the procedure. So in other words, you look at having permanent commissioners in terms of full-time. All right. Of course, they will have to serve a 3-year term and on rotation, whatever. But the point is, they need to be full-time, and you need to have full-time secretariats for all these commissions, and you also need to have it headed by someone no less than at the level of like a permanent secretary. And that, I think, you will see the change beginning to occur, because when you have that repository of the institutional knowledge within the secretariat and the permanent secretary, they can help to guide and steer commissioners from mistakes. So in other words, things that the naive or the indifferent or the inexperienced may tend to want to do, they will be the ones to say, hey, listen, no, that's not how it's done. This is how we do things here.
But I'm hearing,
I think, would make a big difference.
But I'm hearing also, the view, Mr. George, that it has been very difficult, and it continues to be very difficult, exercise to find people who would want to really come forward, even though they may have the skills academically and otherwise. They're just afraid to come forward and be service to country because of all that goes with it. You have, some people are very concerned about the sensitivities that surround family and security and that kind of, those kinds of issues. But still, it continues to be a very difficult task, Mr. George.
Well, you see, it's a labor of love, basically, because the fact of the matter is anybody who is qualified, successful, well-established. They would not be doing this for the, the small stipend that you get for these things, right? So therefore, they are really having to give up their time, their selves, their talents, their efforts, make sacrifices in their family life, their personal life, to attend the meetings all the time, to, sit down late at night, reading through stacks and stacks of volumes of documents and papers, that kind of thing. So
yes.
It's a tremendous sacrifice that you make. So therefore, it's always difficult to get people in such a circumstance. However, in Trinidad and Tobago, it is multiplied in terms of difficulty because you have basically, persons in the public space who sometimes through lack of knowledge and lack of understanding, they then would target and criticize you unfairly, or they make comments. So, and some persons are very sensitive to that kind of thing, and they may feel, well, look, I'm not putting myself out there to become a target for people to criticize. Because if you think of it, Stephen, this new police service commission, whenever it gets going, is going to be under a microscope for the first couple of years of its existence.
But not only this police service commission, Mr. George. I think all commissions are going to be under some kind of microscopic, focus.
Yes, scrutiny. That's correct. That's correct. That's correct. That's correct.
And why I asked the question about getting it right with these institutions, because even only today I saw a press release by the Integrity Commission, calling on public officials or persons in public life to make their declarations. And I think that what the statement also, one of the paragraphs also talked about the Integrity Commission being concerned about some people who have not as yet filed, and they've been given a deadline so to do, in terms of their declarations and their, so there continues to be that issue, in Trinidad and Tobago, but on that point as well, the question of the erosion of public confidence in our institutions. Is confidence beyond repair, and when we have such erosion, Mr. George, does it push us to that dangerous edge of a failed state?
The thing is, the confidence is not beyond repair at all. And I am always very optimistic in terms of Trinidad and Tobago and our potential, right? I have also equally been very clear and castigating of our leaders and their behaviors, because I think that's what has us in this type of dilemma. But the fact of the matter is, if we are able to get good, clear, decisive, positive leadership, we will be able to find our way out of this. This is not insurmountable. This is not, in terms of crises and as far as countries and nations go, this is not, earth shaking or earth shattering to say that, we are on the brink of being a failed state because of this issue. Maybe cumulatively, people may feel, well, wow.
Because I've heard,
when you add up everything, in terms of all other issues, yes, we may be.
Because I've heard. Because why I ask the question again on this particular point, Mr. George? I've heard, the comments of a former prime minister, a former president, and I will, give his name, Anna Robinson, talking about streams running into rivers and rivers running into seas.
Yes.
Could that be a case in some instances?
Well, the thing is, the point is, there has been an erosion and there has been a decline, and that's undoubted. But I would not think that we have passed what is, referred to as the tipping point. If you know, by the author Malcolm Gladwell, the tipping point, he says that, things accumulate by way of accretion, gradually, till it reaches what you call a tipping point, the point of no return. For instance, I have always described 1990 as the tipping point in Trinidad and Tobago's development. I think we started a downward slide from the events of that 1990 coup, from which we've never recovered. So I don't think we are as yet at that from the point of view of, as some people, like to describe it, of, almost becoming a failed state. No, I don't think we're anywhere near that. But the point is, we are working our way along that path.
Okay, I hear you, Mr. George.
So we need to stop and take stock of ourselves and change direction.
And we like to remind our listeners that this is the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings, talking with Mr. Martin George, attorney at law. Our topic this evening, removal of a president. What does the Constitution say, Trinidad and Tobago? Mr. George, we have just a few minutes before we close the program, and I'd want to leave those closing moments to you for some closing remarks as we focused on our Constitution. It's usually described as a living instrument, one that is subject to change. But, you know, the question is, Mr. George, what kinds of changes do we really want in Trinidad and Tobago? And you did raise the question of us not, of the Constitution not in crisis, but a crisis of leadership. Where do we go from here, having regard to all that has transpired and that which may transpire again, you know, in Trinidad and Tobago? Where do we go from here? And your closing remarks.
Well, the thing is, Stephen, I mean, my view is that the citizens need to start actively articulating their views in terms of what type of behavior is acceptable or not acceptable from their leaders. And this has to be irrespective of what color jersey you're wearing, whether it's red or yellow. We have to be able to rise above that political partisanship and recognize that we need to start thinking country first, nation first. That's why, Stephen, I always enjoy these programs, you know, having this type of elevated level of discourse where we can exchange ideas. You know, it doesn't mean that necessarily that one has to agree with the other or, you know, one has to accept what the other is saying. But, you know, just by us exchanging ideas and views and, you know, elucidating them and explaining them in this manner, yes, I might learn something from you, you might learn something from me, and we can both become better individuals. And that's all we need to do to build a better nation. You know, if it is that we keep stuck in this finger pointing mode as how our parliamentarians behave, we will never get anywhere. That's why I tell you, for the past 15, 20 years, if we make an objective analysis of Trinidad and Tobago, we have gotten nowhere fast. That's the reality. We've just been wandering around in circles like the Israelites lost in the desert for 40 years.
Yes.
You know, so we need a Moses to lead us out of this.
Yes, and I've heard you many times, you know, with that very same expression, you know, Mr. George. But again, it has been a pleasure talking with you for yet another time. And, you know, we would obviously, you know, continue the discussion as we go along, because there's so many issues, you know, here that we have to deal with in Trinidad and Tobago, not only the business of the Constitution, but there are so many social and other issues that we have to treat with as citizens going forward. Mr. George.
And I think it's for the betterment of us all.
Thank you again, Mr. George. Mr. Martin George there, attorney at law, and we were talking there about, well, on the topic, removal of a president. What does the Constitution say, Trinidad and Tobago? I'm Stephen Cummings, and this has been the Citizens Community Forum, and that's it for this evening. We will see you next Wednesday. It was a famous poet who once said, "They came for the Jews, and I did not speak out, because I was not a Jew. Then they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." Words there from famous poet Martin Niemöller, 1892 to 1984.